Hello and welcome to my Hunter Soloing Guide. The aim of the guide will be to give you all the basics needed before setting out on your soloing adventures. So we will take a look at Hunter specs, talents, pet talents, abilities, consumables, of course pets themselves, and other things. So, as Noble likes to say, let's get started, shall we? So, first things first, we will start with specializations. Now, of course, we have three specializations, and the usual one I use for soloing is Beast Mastery, simply because it's the one that gives you the most self-healing thanks to the use of a spirit beast. Also, it usually gives the most buffs. And the rotation alternates between burst damage and lower damage, and usually having a burst damage cooldown is pretty useful in soloing usually, because there's a lot of situations where you need to kill some things very quickly. Now, the most important point about the two other specs is that here you will do the damage and not your pet, which can be useful if your pet has a problem or another on a fight, or you can only attack at range. Then, however, for marksmanship, Chimera Charge used to heal you, now it's a glyph, and usually need your glyphs for other abilities. So if you add the fact that in soloing mobility is extremely important and that to do the best of your DPS in marksmanship you have to take steel, well, it's kind of a problem. The only good thing about marksmanship, I'd say, is the fact that your mastery allows you to attack at a farther range, and since some burst abilities can be outranged, it can always be useful. But here is what I call situational, meaning that there are some bosses in which it probably is a good idea to use it, but on most bosses it probably won't be necessary. Then finally there's survival. Here again, you're the one doing the damage, so I mean, if you have leech or something, it can be useful. And also, it excels in kiting with all the traps and all the mobility. And then there's also the fact that it AoEs with dots, meaning that you can just use a multi-shot, take care of other things, and then multi-shot 15 seconds later. Knowing that in BM, if you want to AoE, you have to have your pets, the ads on your pet. Although BM remains the best AoE damage, but survival can be useful in some cases too. One last thing about survival is that where the other specs need to make sure that they use skill shot at the right moment to kill ads and get 15% of their health back, in survival it will be automatical, so that's actually a good point. Now let's take a look at the talents. So in tier 1, you usually have the choice between Post Haste and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Chimera. Post Haste is extremely good for high movement fights, and also it dispels woods. You also have Master Call for that, but it can be very useful. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Chimera is more of a defensive cooldown since it will reduce the damage you take, and also it will reduce the cooldown of Disengage. We'll talk about it later when you also have the Glyph of Liberation, but it also allows you to heal yourself more. So here it's really 50-50, there's not best talents, it's always about the boss. There's also the last talent, which I don't even know the name, but saying how often I use it. That allows you to root mobs if you disengage unless you're actually attacking them. And given the low number of mobs and the fact that usually when they're there, you really aren't trying to kite them, here again, it may be useful on one boss I haven't thought of, but it will be immensely situational. The second tier is probably the least important, since it's pretty rare that you actually use their abilities. Binding arrow is pretty good when you're fighting mobs that can be stunned. However, intimidation can allow you to stun a mob instantly when you use it, so it can also be useful sometimes. And frankly, for Wyvern Sting, it's extremely rare that you can control a mob on a boss, and if you can, usually you want it to control it all the time, so you use Feeding Trap. So here again, actually the three of them are situational. There's not really a best choice here. So, the third tier, the Spirit Bond. That's about all. It will be your default choice in 99% of fights, since it gives you the most self-healing, it heals your pet, and the alternatives are Exhilaration, which I mean could be useful if you need one heal at one particular moment. But in that case, you can also use a potion usually. And of course, there's Iron Hawk, but it's just never used in soloing. I mean, you need to regenerate your health. Now, let's get to the fourth tier. Here is a DPS tier, so you basically take what gives you the most DPS. In this mastery, it will be Dire Beast. It will probably be in Marksmanship and Survival Thrill of the Hunt. However, whatever you spec, you really want to use Thrill of the Hunt if there's a moment where you really have to AoE a lot, or you will just be AoEing throughout the fight, because it's really useful if you are spamming multi-shot. Then, if you have to use Steady Focus, maybe because you like it better or it's actually your best choice, remember that you have to use 2 in a row, but Kill Command doesn't count, and you can also put a Mend Pet between the two. The fifth tier is basically Amanda of Crows, since it's the one that deals the most damage overall. Also, if you're in BM, you can use it with Bestial Wrath, so it will be even more effective. And there's the fact that it's up every minute, so it's like a mini burst, pretty useful. And also, whenever an ad dies with it, the cooldown is reset. On any ad fight, like Horidon is the best example, that is really great. I mean, there's nothing better if you want to kill ads quickly, and also nothing better if you simply want to DPS more. Stampede is more situational because it's a bigger burst than a Mother of Course. However, it has a very long cooldown. And if you remember, in Mist of Pandaria, we had the quintuple last stand trick. Now it doesn't work anymore. Blizzard fixed it. So Stampede is really if you need at one particular moment of the fight, one big burst. And a Mother of Course if you have ads or anytime else. Blink Strike is extremely situational. I mean, mostly if you are unable to DPS yourself and you need your pet to do it for you, then it can be useful. Now for the 6th tier, here again it's a DPS tier. You usually have the choice between Glyphs and Barrage. And here it's entirely up to you. I mean, I prefer Glyphs because I'm usually focus starved. And it takes a lot less focus, a lot less GCDs. I can put in a few Cobra shots too. However, Barrage has the advantage of hitting everything in front of you, not just around the mob that you are targeting. So yeah, they both have their uses, and it's mostly up to you. And no, I have no idea when Power Shot could be useful for soloing. For the last tier, if you are BM, you will want Adaptation, because it gives your pet everything, and also it makes sure that you don't lose any damage by putting your pet in Tenacity spec. Although you might want to turn off Roar of Sacrifice, because it increases the damage your pet takes when it's activated, and that's bad. Of course, if you are Marksmanship of Survival, you really do not want to use your Lone Wolf in Survival. I mean in soloing. So you'll probably use Exotic Ammo. exotic munitions, I mean, since focusing shot is really not a good choice in soloing. Because I said mobility is extremely important. And now onto the glyphs. So there are two, I'd say, required glyphs in soloing, who are the glyph of misdirection, because you want to be misdirecting permanently on your pet during the whole fight. And of course, the glyph of mending, since it actually doubles your healing on your pet, which is pretty useful. It's extremely rare that you don't need one or the other. Either your pet just doesn't take damage, or you don't have any problems with aggro, sometimes because the boss is a static one, so it will only melee people in melee range, but most of the time you will need both. Now for the other glyphs. The problem with Animal Bond is that percentage-based heals are not affected by percentage-based healing modifiers. So Animal Bond won't increase the healing done by Mend Pet or Spirit Bond. However, it will increase the healing received by Spirit Mend and Potion, but it's still pretty rare that you need it. The Glyph of Deterrence, however, is pretty useful because whenever you're going to take a lot of damage in a short while, it allows you to take less with Deterrence, although it is not the best glyph for self-healing. Now for the Glyph of Endless Wrath, there is a bug, because when you use it, your pet loses all aggro and for the duration cannot get it back, so the mobs and bosses will attack you. It is a bug. Blizzard says that they will fix it one day, eventually, maybe. So maybe one day it will become useful, I'll tell you. Now the Glyph of Liberation is also pretty useful because it allows you to heal yourself more, and by more I mean a lot more if, for example, you have the talent Hidden Tiger, Hidden Chimera, which will double the usefulness of the glyph. But even when it isn't, it's usually the most useful glyph with Glyph of Deterrence. Now, another useful glyph is the Glyph of Quick Revival. However, I think it's the kind of glyph that you really need to take only when you need it, because Respect has a very short cast time, only costs 35 focus, you can Deterrence first to avoid damage. So Quick Revival is really when you cannot afford to cast it. And in that case, you have to make sure that whenever your pet dies, you have a lot more focus, so it's a bit tricky. I wouldn't use it unless I really need to. Now, there are plenty of other glyphs, but here again they are mostly situational. Liberation and Deterrence are the two default choices, but for example, Snake Trap can distract a mob if you're not doing any aggro on it. Pathfinding, if you spend your time in aspect of the cheetah, and it's important because you're using it to avoid or to run faster. It can also have its uses, so if you're having trouble on a boss, always check quickly the list of your glyphs and ask yourself if one of them isn't better adapted. Now let's go on to pet talents. There's not much you need to know, only that if you're not using adaptation, you want to put it in tenacity spec. And if he is in adaptation, well, you have the choice, because they are only the two first abilities listed in the talents are different between specs in that case. So, for example, if you take tenacity, you will have Thunderstomp. Well, if you take ferocity, you will have Heart of the Phoenix. A bit of Thunderstomp for the AoE aggro, but it really doesn't matter a lot. Heart of the Phoenix can also be useful. And also you'll have the choice between dash and charge. But basically take what you prefer because it won't have a lot of impact on the combat. Now about pet abilities. First thing, Many pets have similar abilities, so we'll talk only about the kind of abilities in general. There are the shell shield type abilities, turtle, beetles, shell spiders, for example, which is the best defensive cooldown to reduce the damage taken by your pet. Simply because it has 1 minute cooldown, lasts 12 seconds, and it's pretty great when at a certain moment your pet will take a lot of damage. It gives you the time needed to save your pet. Because most of the time, if your pet dies, it isn't really a problem, but if you need your pet to survive, it can be pretty useful. There's of course Spirit Mend, but however that's only for Beast Mastery Hunters. Then there are different pets that can give heroism. Usually you will, if you use it at the start, you can simply dismiss your pet, use it, use your DPS potion, and then send your new pet on the boss. But it will require, it allows you not to use a drum for heroism. And there are also other abilities like interrupting, but they are more rarely used. Now let's talk about consumables, apart from maybe one or two weird potions that you nearly never use. They're nearly all there, which is first the Rune Scroll of Fortitude. Now this is made by scribes. You have 3 versions. Each one requires different reagents, so simply take whatever you want at the auction house or farm it. There's only a 2% difference between the Rune Scroll of Fortitude 1 and the Rune Scroll of Fortitude 3. But what's important is having one because it gives you a good boost at your survivability. Then there's the Drum of Forgotten Kings. It gives you a pretty good DPS buff and it's made by leather workers. However, the reagents aren't of the new expansion, so you might have to buy them or farm them. It depends on the price you have at the auction house. But don't worry, frankly, if you want money, just solo yourselves 25 heroic cataclysm raids, you'll make a lot of money very fast. Then there is food, simple food. It's not very powerful, so it's not really needed. But if, like me, you have a barn, and you only bring river beasts, then you'll be drowning in food, so there's no point in not using it. And then there's Aurelius's Whispering Crystal. It only gives you half of a flask, despite what it says in its tooltip, but unless you're really dying a lot on a boss, it simply allows you to not to use a flask. To get it, you'll need to get the inn and then to get the quest, but it simply takes a little time. I don't think I need to talk to you about DPS potions, and then there is the healing tonic and the shield tonic shield. Now, the healing tonic is better because it can crit, it heals for more and everything, but the shield tonic shield actually absorbs damage. So if you're going to take a very big hit, it can save you from being one-shotted. However, it's true that I don't think I've ever used it. But you know, could always come in handy. Then there's a new addition to this expansion, which is pretty great. It's actually the Living Action Potion. Now, it will replace a DPS potion, but it allows you either to dispel anything that CCs you, or to make it simply not work for 3 seconds. It really depends on how the debuff works. Sometimes it will dispel everything, sometimes it will just protect you for 3 seconds. But it can be quite useful in certain situations. There are also flasks, agility and stamina. Remember that if you don't need extra DPS but you could use more survivability, a stamina flask can be very useful. And then, finally, there are the Drums of Fury. These cost really little to make, also made by leather workers. And they can come in quite handy if you need to use heroism in the middle of a fight. Now, that's about all for the basics. I could have talked again a long time about abilities like distracting shot or aspect of the cheetah that are actually pretty used in soloing sometimes and can have their uses. But I'd only say that if you're ever stuck on a boss, always remember that there are other items out there, but there are also a lot of abilities and glyphs in your spell book that maybe you're not used to using. And if you want to go to the higher levels, remember that soloing is kind of like a puzzle, except where your pieces are everything. And some of them can be used, some of them cannot. I can tell you that most solos usually require a bit of creativity. So here it is. I hope you enjoyed the guide and that it helped you for everything. If you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. If you have any questions on a particular boss, usually there's a video about it, so you can always put it in the comments of that video. And if you're interested more deeply in soloing, you can always check the forum on Elitist Jokes, where us Hunter soloers talk and here. So hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.